Good afternoon, everybody. Joe Illick here from Fort Worth Opera for the third episode of our Fort Worth Opera Salon. I have with me four wonderful creative people from the opera world, and I'd like to introduce them all to you. Here is Carrie Shaw, Kamala Sankaram, Daniel Bernard Roumain, and Nathan Granner. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Unmute yourselves for a moment so that everybody can hear you say hello.
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Hi.
Pleasure to be here. All right.
It's so great to have you all. It almost feels like we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that the pandemic is going to be at least less something that controls everything that we do. I actually was in a theater a few nights ago hearing live music, and I can tell you what a thrill that was. But nevertheless, all of us have found ways to use online platforms to reach a lot of people. Sometimes people we never could have reached before, and sometimes these platforms have been productive enough that we've considered continuing them. I know at Fort Worth Opera, we started something called the Green Room, and I'm sure that it will go far beyond the pandemic because thousands of people who were far away and weren't ordinary listeners tuned in. So I would just love, first of all, to have all of you share anything you want about your recent experiences, but also touch on how online platforms have been beneficial to you in ways that might have been unexpected and might be good enough that you'd like to continue them. Carrie?
Yeah. Obviously, I love interacting with human beings face to face. And so that is something that I'm very eager to return to. However, the logistics of travel and performance are often really difficult to cope with, especially when you are teaching full time or you have a conflicting gig and you're trying to, get these flights to match up. And it's been so exciting to be able to interact with people virtually and work on multiple projects simultaneously from home and not have to really give anything up practically because I could just be in my house and work on it whenever I want to. And so that's been really exciting. And also to keep, especially because I just moved here to Seattle from Minnesota, I was able to maintain a lot of projects in Minnesota that I probably would not otherwise have been able to maintain in the past, because I think no one really considered virtual relationships to be a reasonable option. And now that's not a thing anymore. Now we totally have it down. So that's so exciting to be able to keep those relationships up.
Joe, I think you're muted.
Kamala, talk to us.
Sure. So a lot of the work that I ended up doing in the last year came about out of necessity. Just having contracts all canceled at the beginning, and then seeing my friends who are singers also having all of their work suddenly gone for the next year. So the very first things that I did were really just trying to give people a way to come together and to make music together, and to get them some money, like a tip jar. So that's sort of how it started. But what's interesting about it is that in figuring out how to make work over Zoom, it opened up this possibility for compositional practice that I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about. Because as you know, there's this inherent latency in Zoom because of the way that information travels over the internet, which means that you can never be totally in sync with each other. And a lot of my music has always been very rhythmic, very groove oriented, and that was something that you absolutely cannot do on Zoom if you're going to play live together. So what it meant for me was letting go of some of my normal practices and trying to explore other ways of making a piece. And also in the process of doing that, giving this sort of radical flexibility to the performers, which is something that I've been interested in exploring, partially coming from my work more in the avant-garde jazz world, where you do allow performers to express themselves creatively. You don't see that as much in opera, but here is a case where, because the singers are all responsible for their own technology and their own cameras and everything, that you have to trust them. So that part is let go of automatically. And what ended up happening is I made these scores that were aleatoric, that gave sort of collections of pitches for the singers to use, but that didn't give them any kind of a rhythm, and that had cue points where we all synced up to each other so that they could approach it more like the way that an actor would prepare a monologue or a play. And that the dramatic interpretation was really up to them. And in a way, it was really, really freeing. And I've started actually to incorporate this into the pieces that I'm writing now, for mostly for chamber work, because I think it's harder to do with a full orchestra. But there's something about that, about bringing the performer in, the singer in, as a true collaborator, that we have let go of to a degree in opera. And I think that this last year has taught us, no, we're really in this together. It should be a communal and collaborative and non-hierarchical space. So that's sort of where I have ended up on the other side of it.
Thank you. That's really cool. It is a non-hierarchical space, which I think is one of the great joys. It was surprising. It was surprising just how many of us could meet people that we'd never met. Daniel, speak to us.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Joe. It's a pleasure, and so great to be here.
It's great to have you.
Oh, so great to be here with everyone. I live in 3 places: New York City, Norwood, Massachusetts, and Tempe, Arizona. I'm in Norwood, Massachusetts, the land of the Wampanoag and Poneket people. I'm wearing a yellow jacket. Behind me it says "Stop AAPI Hate." As we know, there's far too much hate and violence, and there always has been, in our Asian communities and Pacific Island communities. Oh, cool. I have a salt and pepper beard, and I will wear my glasses every now and then because I can see better with them, so I'll put them on. They're clear, and I identify as he and him, and I define myself as a Black Haitian American composer, father to a 12-year-old biracial son. He will tell you he's a double minority. He's Jewish and Black, which is interesting. His mother is white and Jewish. So all of that to say that I did have a different experience than what I've heard thus far, which is, I think, good. I think differences are good. I saw and was unfortunately a part of and witness to, not a part of, sorry. I was witness to, and I actually tried to respond against a lot of online hate, a lot of online bigotry, misogyny, racism, prejudice. That's what I saw. I think it fomented in a way, in physical ways. One is January 6th. That's a good example, right? So many of what happened, so much of that mob and that experience started in 2020 online. And I do spend a lot of time online, and I did create work online, some of which was met with that hate and that racism. I wrote a piece called I Am a White Person Who Blank Black People from the New Jersey Symphony. And there were several, and there continue to be, by the way, several racist responses and comments about that piece. A piece in which I was trying to have white people participate in one aspect of how they feel, quite literally, about black people. I wrote an aria called They Still Want to Kill Us, which was also met with a lot of, I would call, a racist rhetoric and response. Most notoriously now, Heather McDonald, a pretty well-known pundit on Fox News, has written an interesting and long article on that piece and that work. So from my vantage point as a Black Haitian American composer, I saw the best of us online, which is what I think we're speaking to, but I also saw the worst of us. And I still see the worst of us in that I'm still very wary of how social media in particular is being used by white nationalists in particular, but also others who support and visit and exchange ideas centered on hate and inequality and racism. What does that have to do with opera? Well, for me, my work is oftentimes looking at stories, like, the tradition of opera, and I'm wanting to tell certain stories. But at least in my case, even wanting to tell certain stories means that I may be subject to ridicule. I may be subject to I may be subject to omission, invisibility, or censorship. I did write an aria for the Tulsa Opera, which was an attempt was made to censor it, and I simply said no, and things happened thereafter. But I will say this: I will say that every year I try to replace a word. This year I've said, instead of saying the word problem, I'm going to say opportunity. Opportunity. And I do think Fort Worth Opera, I do think all of us have an opportunity to get to a place where I would say is a true, shared, radical morality. We're not there yet. We don't share the same morality. Matter of fact, if we took a poll right now, there might be some differences, but what scares me the most is that there are so many people in our country who will not ever share the same morality. And it does come down to life or death. It does come down to the value of us all. And that's a big answer to your question, Joe, but
it's a very real answer, and it's an answer we all know is true.
Yeah.
And thanks for going to the heart of everything so quickly. I mean, let's not waste time. I'm guessing that most of us, although on this screen, we have different sexes and different ethnicities, I'm guessing that most of us have something fairly kindred to the radical morality that you're talking about. But at least I will speak for myself. I share your somewhat pessimistic feeling that I don't think we're going to change that for everybody. And can we use an opera company to make those changes? Can you use your platforms as composers and as performers to make those changes? We can do what we can do, but as long as we're talking about this, I think we should. What do you find, even when the response to a work is more outright racism, does that then provoke a response? Because, sorry, I'm going to step back. There are lots of different kinds of racism. And one of the big dangers, I think, right now is that people who consider themselves not racists are merely passive racists. And because they're not actively doing something that's violent, they're not committing hate crimes, but they're watching them happen. And that's probably a large percentage of the population in America. Reaching those people is more realistic and more important in the short term for us to make headway, I feel. But I'm just saying this as one person, so I would love to know what all of you have been thinking about this. And I know you're all muted, so just unmute and jump in.
I want to hear what Nathan has to say, and then I'll jump in.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nathan Granner. I'm a tenor, and indeed, it's been quite an experience from the get-go of the pandemic. I was the marketing director of Long Beach Opera at the start of the pandemic, and then I took the furlough. We got the furlough, and I started making videos, music videos. We started a web series with LA Opera called Sing Out Loud. We, meaning my wife, Jamie Chamberlain, and I, and we made 18 to 20 minute episodes a week for a time. And it was one of the hardest things that we've ever done. But it was for kids, and we felt that we needed to add some content into the spectrum. And we learned a lot from doing that. We learned a lot about production values, getting things done. We subsequently made a production of The Telephone by Giancarlo Menotti, and kind of ended the season, so to speak, with a music video of Rossini's Otello, the tenor duet. And it was a fantastic experience. We actually did that is Otello and Rodrigo and two brothers. We're like in a hospital room trying to get tell each other that we're more virile while taking the vaccine. So we're trying to like entertain with high notes and fun, but also like give a real message. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I came away with in the pandemic is, when you create stuff, when you create content, it doesn't just have to be for entertainment value. There can be actual representative things that teach a lesson within it, whether it's for kids or whether it's for people who, don't know about the vaccine or have a little bit of, hesitancy about it. There's so much good that we can do in this world that we haven't really been focusing on from the perspective of being on the stage necessarily. I was one of my last operas was The Central Park Five by Anthony Davis, and we won the Pulitzer Prize in 2020 for that. And being able to do a show about real live people in super dramatic circumstances as these five kids was completely eye-opening. And also just telling other people's stories as well on the opera stage was a fantastic extreme that I now see happening, kind of it's rolling up and ramping up. We get to tell other people's stories now. Not that I don't mind, the Traviatas, and those are great, and those allow for us to really search out what's in our hearts, and that never dies. But it is really great to be able to kind of focus on different people and the contemporary problems that we're actually facing today.
Absolutely. Daniel, when does We Shall Not Be Moved premiere in Philadelphia?
Oh, it did.
It did already.
Yeah, it did. It was it had a successful run. I think it was 2017. It made some top 10 lists, including the New York Times. But I'll say it this way: I, as a Black composer, never expect a return engagement. In other words, one of my good friends is Mason Bates. He wrote an opera. His opera is being done all over the place, right? Several friends of mine have written operas. And by the way, Fire Up Into My Bones, Terence Blanchard, I think that's a very rare and wonderful success. I can't name 5 composers, Black composers, who have subsequent performances of their works. That's me. I may be wrong. I want to be corrected. But certainly, I don't expect a work like We Shall Not Be Moved to ever be done again. And I'll ask. I'll investigate. Maybe Fort Worth might want to take it up. Hey, why not?
Hey, why not?
Yeah, why not? But I think that and Kamala and Carrie can also maybe speak to this. I think that equity unfolds in different ways. Black Lives Matter. Yes, words matter. Action matters. I would say every text matter that you put out. And I think that the lack of support, ongoing support, I call it a kind of scaled equity. So Opera Philadelphia wanted to do something in 2017 that centered around that piece and also turning into more of a festival than a subscription-based set of performances. They were taking risk all over the place in every aspect of it. So that mattered. I think so they've done their job, right? And they've been important allies, and they've allyship. And I agree with you. I don't think racism is one level. I think racial insensitivity is another. And I think that unequitable practice is another. So opera does have a problem, and one of the biggest problems I think opera has, monolithically, generally speaking, historically speaking, is not doing the ongoing work of meeting systemic racism with systemic anti-racism. So all of that to say, the return engagement is important, right? That opera is ideally an all BIPOC cast. So already you can see that it's not just me having sour grapes, right? But it's me saying that opera represents something like Fire Up and Upper Bones that allows for, because of the nature of the work itself, more diversity, more inclusion. And I just want to say something else about the Met, because that opera is going to the Met. So that opera is going to be presented by the Met. The Met has yet to commission a black composer. Think about any other genre, any other medium in this country where you have that kind of statistic, movie, ballet, song. And We Shall Not Be Moved, in my opinion, has every right to be at every opera house in this country. That's not a braggadocious statement. That's a statement for our children, for my son, for all of our children to aspire to. Carrie Lee, you should be singing everywhere. Kamala, you should be composer in residence at the Met. And real quickly, the day that happens, the Met changes. And it becomes what I would say, a more representative and human and loving place.
All with you on that.
Can I just underline something there? Because this is the point that I wanted to bring up earlier, which is I think that part of the danger when we talk about racism is that it's easy to think about that it's something as simple as changing somebody's mind. And that's the question you asked, can we change people's minds? And in the end, that's only part of the issue, because so much of it is baked into the way that we work and the way that we commission and the way that we develop and all of that. And so, I mean, I think that that's been something encouraging, is that over the past year, at least, we've started to have conversations about this. Like, why do you have to have the ability to spend thousands of dollars on a work sample in order to get your first commission or your audition? Who is deciding what is qualitative and what is not? And how do we make sure that if you are engaging with a piece that comes from a sort of different musical tradition, that people are in place to understand it and evaluate it properly? And these are all questions that we have to keep asking going forward in order to overcome these structural racist practices that are baked in. So I just wanted to make that point again, because I think it's really important that we don't focus so much on names and individual perceptions that we lose sight of the thing that actually perpetuates those inequalities, which is the structural part of it.
And baked in is a good way to say it, because it lets us know that even if people of good conscience try to do something, that unless there's a really concerted effort to change the system isn't going to change on its own.
Yeah,
Exactly.
you gotta start baking the cake all over again. You can't take the flour out of the cake and somehow the cake still be there. You have to start from scratch and be willing to start from scratch. I encounter a lot of conversations about these matters that get stymied because people are so anchored on one particular aspect of their work or one particular aspect of their organization, and if you take this away, what do we do? How do we raise money? What are our audiences going to say? How are we going to find the artists? And they just, when they start to face the rebuilding possibility, it stops everything in its tracks. And figuring out a way to keep people moving forward incrementally so that they're making progress, rather than just saying, let's have another meeting in a month and talk some more and not do anything. We got to get past that. Meetings are worthless at this point. Do something.
Yeah, it's difficult to put that all together. I was a part of Representation Matters over at Orlando Opera, and they're really trying to push stuff out as well. And they're also like, hey, you guys are having these meetings, what can we do? But within that, within all of the other things that we're having to do, we're working 3 times as hard putting pieces together as performers, you know, producing our own work, recording, re-recording again. You know, there's so much busy work to be done that it's hard to really kind of push stuff forward, push agendas forward, and make action plans, and then actually actionize them. What was really cool for me was seeing the metamorphosis of LA Opera and how their connects, their education department, which we worked for, how they moved forward and turned more into a company that was helping us produce things rather than us producing something in our single room apartment. All of a sudden they were editing some things. All of a sudden we were affording these things that were, you know, that were afforded to just regular stage companies to build things and create things, so that we weren't just killing our souls to be able to do it. I think there's a lot that has to be said about the resources necessary to produce this amazing art form. I mean, back in the 1815s or whatever, there was operas in bar. There was opera in bars, like down the street. People were putting new pieces on all the time. And I feel like we're getting to that. We're getting to a critical mass of new opera, new pieces coming out, new ways of saying things. But I think there is yet the underpinning of resource that is still lacking in order for us to take our credit cards and like make everything on our own, and hopefully it works, you know, but we're in debt. You know, we having to reinvest in our own careers and our own productions and our own things is one thing, but I mean, it would be really nice to have a little bit of, you know, not just a grant here or there, just like a pipeline, so that maybe when we're creating a new stage piece or a video production, there's actually like a distribution method or something that we don't have to work on so hard. Being the janitor, being the tax collector, the doer, the money raiser as an independent artist. I think though, for me, you know, after George Floyd, things didn't get harder for me though, personally. They kind of got easier as it went along. And as a BIPOC person, as a Black artist, just having a moment where I look at my career and I look at the gigs coming up, the pay kind of increasing a little bit, it's been kind of a godsend for me personally. I know a lot of people it's been more difficult, but my goodness, there are some steps that have happened. There are some things that have happened that are making it a little bit easier. And I would love to see more of that happening, more resource, more, you know, go do it, more boards saying, hey, I know what you're going through, I'm going to help you out, rather than being completely and utterly scared of their company falling apart or whatever.
I think that's real. I think what we have seen in Fort Worth is probably not different from what other cities are seeing, which is in order to tell new stories, have new audiences, get out into the community and say, this is not the same as what your grandparents experienced. We are going to a lot of different smaller venues than the big hall. You know, it's our 75th anniversary of the company next year. And so in the big hall, we do La Traviata, as you know, Nathan, because you're in it. But, you know, all the smaller halls bring audiences who maybe aren't used to going to Bass Hall. And so we can do some really cool stuff there. I think that there is some fear on our board, but I think that a lot of people have really embraced the forward momentum, which is very encouraging. And the people who don't are, in some cases, the most dramatic cases, saying, thank you, I've loved my time with the board and I'm choosing to resign from the board. And that's okay. I mean, that has to be okay. But yes, does that engender nervous feelings about how are we going to pay for all this? It also makes us think, how can we do the most important work, which is getting it out there somehow without paying so much for it? And I suspect you've all experienced that in one way or another, that we want to keep this incredible thing alive because as a way to tell stories and bring people together. At its best, opera is fantastic. Does it always achieve that? No, but it's worth trying. It's always worth trying.
Yeah, I mean, I was experiencing this even before COVID, but I think COVID has pushed technology as part of opera forward more significantly, and that's kind of exciting because there are some things that you can do that look spectacular that don't cost anything, that don't cost very much money at all, and I think people kind of ignored those options in the past because the tradition was so thick, and you got to have, the bohème, open apartment with the roof and you got to have the big crowd scene and the big staircase, and it's going to cost $1 million to build this thing so that no one dies. And, I think now people realize that even actually my favorite example of this, I know it probably cost a lot of money, but still, my favorite example of this is the Sarajevo opera that the Met did. And they had that beautiful chain of just lights, just chains of lights. That's the whole set. And the chorus is behind it. You can completely recreate that in your backyard with a bunch of lights and with a bunch of Christmas lights. And with the digital opera and virtual opera, there are all sorts of things that people have started to develop as part of camera work that don't cost actually very much money and don't require a huge amount of expertise. It just requires that you break through the not knowing about it and the not knowing how to do the basic things. But once you're past that, it actually makes it possible for us to have these low budget things look really quite fantastic. And so that's, hopefully people are going to hold on to that a little bit, not just go back to saying, oh yeah, we got to spend $10,000 on costumes. That's the way we're going to make this really snap.
And ideally, the more we focus on the singers and the stories, and the less we focus on cool sets, the more impact a piece can have emotionally on the audience.
I quite agree. I completely and utterly agree. You look at a just a regular TV commercial, and it looks so slick and neat. I was in this commercial where I was playing some kind of inmate, and they put me in some orange jumper suit, and they literally had used duct tape to represent the bars of the jail. And they shone a light on the duct tape to make it look like bars, and it was going down on the ground. And once the commercial was on, it was like, oh, that was just a big room and some duct tape, literally, and a camera and some lights. So yeah, the imagination that we should be allowing ourselves to use these days, not only in terms of composition but also production as well, is a fantastic kind of zenith point where we are right now. It used to be that we could do movies, opera movies. We were doing movies as operas a ton, like The Chocolate Soldier. There's just so much. So that's actually an historical thing. It's not just a thing that's new. We're just getting back to it and being able to utilize all of the media, all of the things, all of the creativity that we have invested in, that we can refine, repurpose, whether it's vintage or new technology with AI or even non-fungible tokens and cryptocurrencies and things. There's all sorts of really cool things that we can do. What we do with it, that's the really difficult point. And Joe, I think back to your point about the stories, really it's really about the stories, because the lights and the film and whatever, it doesn't really matter unless there's something going on that can actually just grab and touch and talk to our audiences, whomever they are, our patrons.
Yeah, whoever goes into that theater, whatever size the theater is, is going to see that story told. And somehow, if you are confronted with something in your own life, sometimes you can't deal with it. And if you see it on a stage and everybody is separate, you can identify, and that's where the individual change can happen. Now, Kamala, that doesn't address the kind of change that's deeper that you're addressing, and Daniel, that you're addressing when you say a Black composer can get a work done once, but can it be done repeatedly? Will it be done in different theaters around the country? I mean, I can hear most composers saying, most of us don't get our work done, you know, but your point is right on, because I saw your friend Mason Bates's opera too, and I think that some operas are easier for the whole audience to digest, right? There's nothing challenging. Were you referring to the Steve Jobs opera?
That one. That's one.
Yeah, okay, that one. So done in several cities, and there's nothing in that opera that threatens an audience member of any race and makes them feel uncomfortable. So, you know, and good piece. I'm not talking about the quality of the piece.
Right. That's really interesting, though. It lovingly and respectfully, it does make me uncomfortable because, I mean, well, first of all, the subject matter, well, it makes me uncomfortable because, well, I'll say it in a general sense. It makes me uncomfortable because I know how much investment is happening on that stage. You know, say what you want about Nico Mulhy or Thomas Addis, but these are young white men who have had multiple commissions from the Met. We're talking millions of dollars. You know.
Yeah, you're comfortable from an artistic, moral, or ethical point of view.
As a parent, I want to bring my child. It's as simple as that, right? If you don't have children, if you have children in your community, you have children. So I think that education or lack of education leads to a lot of these problems in our culture and communities that we're talking about. I think it's, you know, this country was founded, I think, on these basic kind of principles of religion and morality and education. Somewhere in these things got lost, I think, along economic lines. You could be very wealthy and not well educated, right? Something, but that wasn't always the case, right? But that being said, it makes me uncomfortable because I realize that how much more could be done with those types of literal, figurative, and moral investments. So it's not just the money, it's how the money's being allocated. For every 2 boys, or for every The Exterminating Angel, or Marnie, right, there are probably 5 or 10 operas by probably 5 or 10 women or BIPOC women or anyone who is from a marginalized group that could probably use those monies better. Now, I'm being vulnerable in this moment. I'm saying that I like Mason Bates. If he was standing right next to me and I've had this conversation with her, I'd say, hey, I am going to support your success. That's not the question. Do you support mine? And that means, and again, somebody was talking about action. Carrie, you're right. I'll give you a real quick notion of how action can happen. Imagine that every time Josh Bell played a concerto with an orchestra, he said, I'm going to have a BIPOC violinist open up for me 10 minutes, and they can do whatever they want. You know, there are traditions from other genres that we can really learn from. There's no Van Halen without AC/DC. I'm just putting that out there, right? And there's no Prince without the Rolling Stones, you dig, right? So I think that if every opera company said, hey, before we're going to do our main thing that we keep saying makes us money, have an opening act, right? That's not hard. That's not hard at all. And by the way, I will say this. I'm personally tired of inclusion. Inclusion is so 2019. I think we got to talk about centering, right? If you include me, that means Black History Month, you include me. But that's not where we are anymore. Centering means I'm right next to you. I would say centering means 50-50. Why not? Why can't we simply, I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask questions like that because, Joe, I want to get back to what you were saying. You're right. A lot of composers don't have their work done multiple times. But the problem I'm trying to underline is that the composers that do are often one thing or two things, white and male. That's a problem. That's a problem.
That is so true.
Yeah. I
By
would
the way,
also,
Joe, you're an ally. I just want to say real quick, Carrie, Joe, you're an ally. You know, when I look at this Zoom room, we could literally all be cousins. If you look at our color, right, we could all be cousins. I think it's really important to point that out, that race ain't nothing but how much time you spend in the sun. We're all burning right now. So I just want to point out, because I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Joe. In some ways, Joe, you are the minority in this Zoom room, which is kind of a cool thing in my opinion, right? But I'm just pointing out.
It's cool.
You're the new minority, my
I
brother.
think
The new minority.
we all want the same thing, and the path forward is not clear, right? You have an opera company, you want to tell different people's stories, you do what you do, and the costs are real. I mean, I think we've all talked about that, but we're not doing opera for financial reasons. Nobody in their right mind ever gets into opera because they want to make money. We get into opera as our way of expression because for some reason it speaks to us more loudly, more deeply, more resonantly, more fully than any other art form. And I've been that since I was 10. So you know, it just was unusual set of circumstances that led me straight into the San Francisco Opera as a little boy. And I was on that stage before I was in the audience. So, you know, I've been hooked for over 50 years, but I know we can do something with it. It's a medium through which we can accomplish things. And obviously, a panel of people who came from politics or government or whatever would be hopefully saying there's a lot of ways that they could accomplish those things, but I don't have those ways accessible to me.
Yeah, we might. I think Carrie was going to say something. So.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to agree with you about the idea of centering rather than inclusion. I think that's so great because I've seen a lot of grant panels and, you know, prize committees and things like that where at the end of it, you end up with your, you know, top 10 or whatever, and you look at the list and then you see how white and male it is. And, you know, and ostensibly, if it's, you know, about quality or whatever, then okay, you know, why is it like this? And no one wants to ask the question about their center, what is centered in this process that makes this the result. Because that's, if you change what is centered, now you're saying, well, the values that I used to have, they were wrong. It's really hard to let go of the values you had because it makes you vulnerable to looking back at your past and saying, maybe I was making a mistake all those years. And so it's very hard to convince organizations to change their centering rather than what normally happens, which is we're making a mistake. Let's make a special project or a special, you know, category so that we can capture these other people. We're going to keep our center here, but we're going to make this little satellite that has a different center that isn't, it's not the same as this. This is our real center, but this is our special center. That doesn't make any sense. You should just, you got to figure out what do you value. And if your values are not reflected in the results, then something is wrong.
Can I add to that? Because this goes back to the same point about what our practices are. And the reason that so often the list ends up like that on a grant panel is because there are things that are other than the music that are coming into play, right? Like, what is this recording clear or not? Where did this person go to school? Does their score look nice? Did they make a cover page for it? You know, and it's little things like that shouldn't have an impact on how we make judgments, but they do. And it's only when we accept and allow ourselves to interrogate what those practices are that are making us come up with results like this, that we're going to be able to change them. But I think, you know, I think that requires the first step of admitting that our practices are flawed in some way, and then saying, okay, well, what is it about the way that I'm approaching this that is leading to that result again and again? And it's been easy to hide behind this idea of quality, because there's no real marker for quality other than a person's supposed expertise and reputation and all of that, which relies on the same markers that we're talking about to begin with. So it's kind of this cyclical thing. But I think that that's an action item, is to, step back and say, what am I using as the scale by which I measure a person's worth, a person's talent, the worth of a piece? Is it something that relies on my own background only? Is it that the piece takes 5 minutes to develop instead of having an exciting beginning? Like there are things like that once you sit back and you say, oh yeah, I am only sending forward these kinds of pieces or these kinds of people, then you can make a concerted effort to change. And I think at this point, that's what it requires, is a concerted effort, right, to actually be active about how you're negotiating these practices and how you are trying to uplift people and works that have not gotten the kind of attention and work and money that they should get.
That's such a great point. I feel like, when you're first starting out, nobody expects you to be great or good or whatever. Although they do. There's a perfectionism world, an air, a main that we must maintain so that we can get, be the professionals that we are. Rather than, giving a start and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a chance. Here's your shot. And here's another shot. Here's another shot after that. We just get one shot. I remember producing some things in Kansas City and I got one shot. And it was okay. It was cool, but then the word on the street was, oh, I heard it was blah, blah, blah. So never again. I'm just well, were the Beatles great from the beginning? Was Marvin Gaye an amazing singer from the beginning? I mean, were you an amazing composer, when you first set down your pen to paper? I mean,
well, that real quickly. So in some ways you're talking about maybe performance practices, and this is where I'm going with things now.
Performance practices or composition practices or whatever it is to make things happen. It doesn't.
Whatever it is when you first appear before the world that you're entering.
Yeah. Or yes, and I would say when you're in that world, how can you keep innovating it and evolving it? And that's what's so exciting to me right now. There's this really interesting interview with Dave Grohl, head of the Foo Fighters, right, former drummer of Nirvana, on a Howard Stern show. I know this is going to make sense. And at one point, Howard says, well, how did you guys make music? Did he respect you? You were the drummer. Did he allow you to bring in your songs? And Dave's like, no, it really wasn't like that. It was like, we would go into a rehearsal room and Kurt Cobain didn't even really want to talk. It was more about, he had the song, he would start to play the song, and he didn't want to even tell us what to do. He just wanted everybody to just kind of come into the song, and we would do that for hours, just kind of going over different songs. And when he really liked something, he would say, okay, let's keep it that way. That was it. And I thought to myself, this is a few years ago, I thought to myself, okay, the next time I'm playing a violin concerto, next time I'm playing my voodoo violin concerto. And you got to remember, behind me is monolithically oftentimes one type of people. In front of me in the audience is monolithically one type of people too, that I'm in the middle of something where I don't necessarily have a lot of my people there. That said, I said, in this particular rehearsal, with this particular professional orchestra, when it gets to the cadenza, I'm going to turn to the conductor. I'm going to say, hey, I want the whole orchestra to just kind of be with me and go with me. And I remember I was doing these two notes. It was like, dun, 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 dun. And I've got a 6-string violin, so I can hit all the ranges. And I just stuck to it. I was like, I am not going to explain myself. And sooner rather than later, sorry, this was a youth orchestra, forgive me. Sooner rather than later, this youth orchestra, they were right there with me. They just started playing the two notes and then playing two chords, and then it was just this thing that happened. And it was, if I had tried to explain it, it would not have happened because they brought their own ideas to the table. It was a hell of a lot of fun. It took 3 minutes. I tried to do the same thing with a professional orchestra that shall remain nameless, and they wouldn't even like entertain the notion of what I wanted to do. Improvisation, and it wasn't, but that type of music making went out the door because they wanted to be told everything to do, which if you think about it, Nathan, that's, or Carrie, that's just one tradition, right? Classical music making, as I like to say, most musicians and artists, most musicians in the world don't read notated music. They are non-literate, not illiterate, and there's a big difference.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm getting jazzed now. I'm excited by looking at the totality of music making and how we can bring some of those performance practices into opera, into classical music education, into the audience, you know.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, typically in my cadenza, there's a point where I call out and have the audience respond. I don't even tell them. But what's interesting is that in my tech writer, when I ask for a microphone, some professional orchestras say, well, why do you need it? We don't usually, Josh Bell isn't asking for the microphone. So, but again, right, that has to do with how we speak to one another and how we speak with an audience. But I'm digressing a bit. I'm excited by how we can, when I'm talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm talking about diversity, equity, inclusion of ideas. And in those ideas are new sounds, new ways of doing things. And that's where a new audience lies. And that's where the riches lie, pun intended.
Well spoke.
Yeah.
Well spoke. I think that the performance practice. Well, I mean, like, I studied with a Tibetan monk to sing throat singing. Not for me, but if somebody came along and was like, "Hey, can you do that?" as a composer, I would be like, "Yeah, I got that." Flamenco, Turkish music, all these other things that we just really don't look at in normal classical music has slowly opened into this cherished place that we're kind of in, or that we can be in now. It's not just about the 1-4-5-1s of the day. What is the dominant sub blah to do, and then it's not even that. There's other things. There's just so much more depth and breadth of sound that we can capture and convey, hopefully in a pretty authentic manner too, with people who aren't just ripping off music or something like that. It's like within the soul, and conveying that from the stage to people. I have a question, Joe. When you were first starting out, or when you were like, I don't know, like starting a company or grabbing a new member of a new group of board members, did you like, what was their feeling like, coming in and and creating an entity, creating a thing? What was the energy like in doing that?
Excitement, right? But boards, systems, everything tends to replicate itself, because the people making the decision, as we've talked about, here's the list of 10 pieces, 10 composers, 10 new ideas, 10 whatevers. If most of those people have been part of the system all along, then they're going to say, but this is what really resonates with me because this feels like what I like the most. And so it's frustrating because you can't upend something from inside with the consensus of everybody. I mean, when I tried to do that, I simply lost a job and went somewhere else. But that's fine. But I think that it's not easy to change a whole system. Let's pose the question this way. Peter Gelb calls each of you and says, "I've really decided to go to the Caribbean and open a bar, but here's $100 million, and I would like you to run the Met. do what you want. So what would each of you do? What would be the best use of the funds and the best way to really start a whole new world?
First of all,
First of all, woo, that's a hell of a question. Go, brother, go.
all right. So I look at Coca-Cola, the company, as an example of some ways to move our industry forward a little bit. And what I mean by that is it's not just Coca-Cola. There's Diet Coke. There's Dasani water. There's da 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 da. They have diversified themselves, and not just in the terms of diversity, but also in terms of why is main stage brand the only thing? You know, why don't we like break this up into smaller chunks? We can give a lot of people a lot of work and a lot of creativity and a lot of license to do way different things. Creating a brand based upon a brand is one way to kind of like just expand our entire kind of market share in a lot of respects. It doesn't just have to be a main stage production.
So the
Like,
board,
why
Nathan, Nathan, take your $100 million. Are you going to do Rossini's Otello? Are you going to do all BIPOC composers? What are you going to do for this season where you have
good question. Just like and I'm from Kansas City, so my big museum is the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. The Nelson Atkins has a fantastic collection of Impressionism, from Byzantine to Impressionism, whatever. They have different wings. So yeah, I'm going to do Rossini's Otello. Yes. But I'm also going to put some Philip Glass in there, some Baroque pieces, just breaking those up so that we're not like just one thing. Yes, I think the Museum of Opera, and I call it that unabashedly because I think it's important, is just as important as the Gallery of Opera as well.
What are you going to do, Kamala?
Well, I mean, I think it's very similar, because if there's one thing that suddenly being forced to put everything online has taught us, I think, is that people who don't think they like opera actually do. And if you give them a way to access it, they will listen to it. But what that means is that, we don't have only one kind of television. We don't only have one kind of film. Why should we have this one idea of what opera is and that's it? I mean, I think that ideally, if you have a budget of that size, what you can do is you can really specifically make things for different audiences. Not everyone is going to like the same thing. So why should you try to, like, this is something that actually is one of my pet peeves, is when we talk about educating people about opera and teaching them that they should like it. And I feel like, who are we to tell people what they should like? We should show them what it is. And if they like it, great. And they will, like some of them will and some of them won't, just like with other things, like I love Tarkovsky films and not everybody has that taste. So I would take it and I would break it down and I would spend some of it on a big budget productions. But then there are other opportunities, like, one of my favorite things in New York used to be that the Met would do an opera in the park every summer, and they stopped doing it, and you could go sit in the park. It was free. You would hear young artists usually, but they would do a whole opera. And it was packed. I have never seen that many people sitting in the park together listening to opera. I've never seen that many people listening to an opera together. And same for me, when I did a virtual reality piece, we had over 14,000 people listen to that piece in the first month simply because it was online. So I think yes, all opera, yes, everything, yes, do it all because you have the budget.
Love it.
Sorry, I got muted. Carrie, what are you going to do?
I don't know. It's funny because I don't really think about like the money being the biggest barrier usually. I usually think about time being the biggest barrier and people. Just having people, obviously money will make people more willing to do what you want them to do. But I don't know, like I kind of feel like what you need to make something really genuinely popular and sort of part of the fabric of a society is something that everybody can share. So, we for millennia we had the church and everybody went to the same place on Sunday and they had this thing that they shared, or you had nomadic tribes that came to one place once a year to meet, and to trade or whatever. Like there were rituals that brought everyone together, and I feel like we've lost that when it comes to a lot of sort of our arts culture. And so maybe what I would say is my outlandish plan would be to have a cult. And it would meet every Sunday and we'd just listen to great music and we'd talk about what makes culture and society healthier and in artistic terms. And that I would definitely not be the leader of that religion, but I would be helpful.
You would be a participant.
Yeah, I would be a willing participant, and Daniel could be our leader, I guess.
Okay, leader, speak to us, Daniel. What would you do? Peter Bell gives you the Met.
Wow. First of all, I've never been asked to be the leader of a cult before, so that's cool. And Joe, what a great question. I've never been asked or even heard a question like this asked before. Okay, quickly, I would first of all pay the taxes on it. Secondly, whatever's left, half of it would go into some sort of trust or annuity or endowment. So third, let's say. So that precious third, still a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's funny, I would draw upon my experience I'm having right now with the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra, where I was invited in to be their resident artistic catalyst, 2-year appointment, where I'm doing a lot of different things. One of them is helping to curate concerts. Got to be careful where your activism goes. But with that, I would look seriously at 3 important things. The first thing, I would look at the board. And I would ask certain board members to leave. Time to go. And I would try to do it in a cooperative way, saying to them, your service has been important, but we're going in a new direction. So it'd be a lot of interview and a lot of painful decisions, but I would, because I'm assuming embedded in your question, more than just donor is a certain amount of power, let's say.
Yeah, the whole purpose and mission really
right
to be examined.
Sure. So that's the first thing. Second thing I would do, I would look at very carefully at the staff, leadership, musicians, and think about what changes had to happen. Probably a lot of changes in the staff. Probably some changes in the musician, definitely changes in the artistic leadership. I would definitely appoint, without question, a person of color as the music director. Man or woman or LGBTQI identifying, I don't know, but it would be somebody who I think best represents New York City, y'all. Right? And then those are very carefully calibrated pillars. Whatever's left, then I'm going to look at programming. And, so here's the thing about programming. I mean, I don't love all aspects of opera. I would rather much listen to Stone Soup, Joe, than, The Marriage of Figaro. That's just me. There's so many operas that I just don't find appealing. So, but that's not my place. You're getting to this notion of audience, and I think audience building. And I get that. I understand that. But part of programming is messaging. So rather than get into the weeds of what opera or what have you, I would say this. I would say that the Met Opera is going to look at opera from a completely equitable point of view. And our programming is going to be bifurcated. Our programming is going to be in tandem with the past, the present, and the future. We're going to look at a kind of ancestral futurism in terms of our programming. So for every time we do Mozart or every time we do Verdi, we are committed to doing a new work. And I'll get into the weeds a little bit. I would probably, because I have thought about this actually, I would probably start the 100s, right? The 100s, meaning every season we would commission 10 new works of various sizes for the next 10 years. That's right. So, because see, for me, I would say that Opera is not 2 hours in a 3,000 seat hall. That's what you're getting at. Opera really, and we've discovered this, right? Opera really needs to be 3 minutes long on our cell phones. That's opera. So 10 works every season for the next 10 years. That's our commitment. Now, can you imagine? Oh, by the way, all by marginalized people. All by marginalized people. And I think that sends a signal. Oh, sorry, I get a little bit like, because think about it. In 10 years, Stone Soup is important. Frida Kahlo, that's important work. It's important work to you, Joe, and for the children that sang in it, and for the children that watched it. I dig. So
Preach!
Right. So 100 operas in 10 years means now our children have 100, and they're all on the website. They're all accessible, every second of them. Our children now have 100 examples of things to aspire to. Chin up. That's what I would do.
Let's do it.
Let's do it, Joe. Fort Worth, 100 operas, the hundreds.
Hey, could I?
Everybody else.
If we had an extra, not even an extra, but kind of taken $4 or $5 million from there. I've been dying to put an opera together where the audience is a part of the making of the opera. So for film, an actual film, where you as an audience weren't just sitting in some comfy seat, you're actually on location with us shooting the film. You got to sign away your rights, to be in the film, but you're, kind of like this Game of Thrones behind the scenes. You get to play the guard, you get to live there for a little bit and visit and whatever. So instead of paying the $250 or whatever for your orchestra seat, you actually get to be in the movie, in the show. And I think like creating a pocket of that, creating a new television show, like my one big goal is to create Die Schöne Müllerin, the television series, like for HBO. I'm like, why don't we just open our minds to like actually doing this stuff on the platforms that are allowing us to be in people's living rooms and salons. Speaking of salons, why don't we do that and compete in the very same place? Not compete, but just like be in the same place as everybody else, rather than in some vaunted place.
Right.
And one more thing,
Yeah.
opera was also a big celebration of a community. Like Verdi creating pieces or getting commissioned for whatever festival of Rome or something. There's a lot to be said for creating works that really bring in the community, celebrate the surroundings, celebrate the people around it, and give them things to do and be proud of as well. That's all I got.
No, there's so much more that all of you have got. And I know you've got a son at a baseball game, and I know all of us have lives. But what I'm going to propose here is that any of you that want to, let's make a pact that we're going to actually create a piece that we do. I don't know exactly what that will be yet, but let's all work together on something, because I mean there's so much great thought here and right thought here, and none of us can do it alone, right? We need each other. We need to help each other out and get in there. So I'll get in touch with each of you individually after this little salon, and we'll just see where that leads us, because I really believe there's something here for us to do, even if Mr. Gelb doesn't call us.
That's okay. That takes us full circle back to Carrie. So hey, action.
Yeah, Carrie.
I love it. I like to say, can we take BLM or DEI energy and convert that into, can we take BLM energy and convert that into DEI action? So I applaud you, Joe. That's a I'll
I applaud
meet you.
all of you.
Let's do FWO action.
Thanks, Nathan. Okay. I thank every one of you for being here with us. This is great. And like I say, I'll be in touch with each of you soon, and we'll see where we go, okay?
Super hot.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, loved it. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for Fort Worth Opera Salon.
If you like what you heard and you want more, please consider making a donation to support Fort Worth Opera and all the work we do to bring opera to North Texas and directly to you through our new digital initiatives, like this podcast. Text FWO 2021 to 44321 or visit our website, www.fwopera.org, to make a donation. If you'd like to send us a message with topics you'd like to hear more about or questions for our guests, please email salon@fwopera.org and be sure to follow us on social media at Fort Worth Opera to find out about the next episode of Fort Worth Opera Salon. See y'all later.